Morning, fellas. Question of the day: how do you live out your faith in a hostile culture? So, I guess there's just an assumption that the culture at points is hostile to Christianity, mostly because it has historically been that way. There are times when it's more or less. We're probably in a time in this country where it's probably a little bit less. It's probably more okay to be a Christian. But don't expect that that is going to stay that way forever. So how do you handle it? First of all, be prepared. Be prepared for persecution. God's people have always been persecuted. From the time that they began as a people, the Israelites in Egypt were in slaves. They were in slavery for 400 years. I just picked a few people: Daniel, Jesus, the apostles, the church. You know, the church at one point was experiencing a lot of good stuff and notoriety and things like that. And then they had people that wanted to kill them and throw them in jail for their belief system. You look at the martyrs during the Roman period, all the people who were killed for their faith, and it was just a really bad time. And then the church became a state religion, which probably made it worse. Because when you mix the government and church together, bad things happen eventually. But the numbers I've heard recently are, in the world today, there are more Christian martyrs today, more people who are dying or persecuted for their faith today in the world than the rest of history combined. So it's nothing new. Just because we're experiencing a better time right now in this country doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. Almost, there may be a tribulation coming at some point from a sermon that I've heard recently. So be aware if you do not encounter opposition. So one of the things we talked about recently is just the idea that if you are, before you become a Christian, you're just kind of heading your way. But the whole idea of repenting is that you turn around and you go the other way and you follow God's way. If you've ever been in a river that's flowing and you're walking with the river, with the current, it's pretty easy. But if you stop and if you turn around and try to walk against the current, it starts to get difficult. And, you know, it's a little dicey at times. Well, if you are going the way that Satan wants you to go, why would he bother you a bunch? You're already doing the stuff he wants. But if you turn around and start going against the flow, you're probably going to encounter some persecution. You're probably going to encounter some bad times. So just be prepared for it. Jesus said, the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Persecuted because you're doing godly things. If you're just a jerk at work and you're persecuted, that's on you. Sorry. That's just a part of it. But if you're persecuted because you're living out God's kingdom, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. When you read the Old Testament stories, you see all the prophets who are speaking for God, and a lot of times it didn't end well for them. But God says that we are blessed when people do these things because of our walk with God. For me, probably that's a hard one. When people say stuff about you that's not true, that's a hard one for me to deal with. But we shouldn't be surprised when it happens. And then Jesus, toward the end of his life, said, if the world hates you, keep in mind it hated me first. If they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you as well. So that's something we have to look forward to in the future, that when we take a stand for God, it's probably not always going to be nice and easy. So how do I live up my faith? Number one, I'm prepared for it. Number two, know who you are. Peter writes and says, but you're a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God. Those are pretty glorious descriptions of what it means to be a follower of Christ. There are times that we don't look at ourselves in this way. I had lunch this week with my father-in-law, and at his church, he brought his sermon notes from the church. And the sermon topic was, you need to love yourself. Now, there's definitely places where that theme could go really wrong really fast, because I think we all pretty much already love ourselves more than we love God at times. But I understand what the preacher was trying to get to. We are a creation of God. You know, we shouldn't be ashamed of that. We shouldn't be ashamed to be people. I think, but I asked him at lunch, I was like, so do you love yourself? And he's like, well, I don't know. Sometimes, occasionally. And like, it's very interesting response. I think a lot of people would be that way. We see ourselves, there's definitely a portion of the population that sees ourselves as not that good. But here's God's descriptions of us. We're a chosen people belonging to God. God adopted us into his family, and he thinks that we're pretty special. We're a chosen priesthood with a purpose to declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you're a people of God. Once you have not received mercy, but now you've received mercy. You were in darkness, the wonderful light. That's what we're called to be. Oh, nope, I didn't put it there. We're called to be a light in the world. Light in this setting is good. It's even better when there's more light on my face. We don't have that right now. Light is not always good though. If it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you've been asleep and someone turns on the light, we don't like the light in that situation. You know, we fight against it. And so one of the things that we need to understand is we are supposed to be light. And when we act like light in our situations, people get convicted and they don't like that. And we make them feel bad just because we're doing the stuff that God told us to do. And that's probably one of the reasons that persecution happens. Peter also says, dear friends, I urge you as aliens, strangers in the world, to abstain from sinful desires that war against your soul. The word strangers I like a lot. The word in Greek is sojourn, a sojourner. I like that word, even though I may not pronounce it the best. It's one who's passing through. So it's just the idea that, hey, this world is just a time that we're passing through, but we're still in relationship. We're not just keeping to ourselves. Just because we're temporarily here doesn't mean we just focus on us. You know, we're still in relationship with those around us. Dear friends, as aliens, strangers in the world, abstain from sinful desires, live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds. So, in your work situations, in your friends situations, in your family situations, if you have all the people that are not believers in those situations, live such a good life among them that they can say bad stuff about you. Where was it? They can say all kinds of stuff about you that's wrong, but they see your good deeds. And eventually they go, you know what? That's not all you, because I know who you are. And I know that you wouldn't be doing those things if it wasn't for some other influence. And that's where you just say, you know, yeah, I started taking my walk with God seriously. It's been changing my life. That's why I'm acting different than I used to. And then they praise God, not you, but they praise God for that. So how do I live out my faith? I'm prepared for persecution. I remember who I am. I am different. I'm separate from who I used to be, from the way the world acts. And then, so how am I different? I set an example. There it is. You're the light of the world. That's what Jesus said. You're the light of the world. Let your light shine before men. They may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. And we just talked about that. This is my favorite verse when I was working with teens. Paul put Timothy in charge of the church in Ephesus, and it was just a mess. And Timothy was a young guy, and it was hard for a younger guy to minister to people that have a lot more life experience. And for teens in the church, this was our favorite verse because it says, Paul writes to Timothy, says, don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, but set an example. Set an example in what? In your speech, your life, your love, your faith, and in your purity. So set an example in your speech. That would be not just like not telling dirty jokes, stuff like that, but it's also using your words to encourage other people, to build up. It's easy to look at situations and complain about them a lot. It's harder to take the time to notice the good and to compliment or encourage. Set an example in your life. Again, it's not just about not doing things that God tells us not to do. It's about what can I do to push forward God's kingdom. And it's the idea, I love this contrast, the idea of going from being a consumer to a contributor. I love that concept. Instead of just taking in all the time, my life is going to be such that I am pushing out stuff that I've learned and that I can help with. In love, again, it's probably easier to love some people more than others. This is setting an example in the way that you love those people who are hard to love. We all have people in our lives that are hard to love, probably. If we don't think that we have a lot of them, maybe we are the person that's hard to love, right? Our faith is about trusting in God. It's not just the belief that, oh yeah, God's real. You know, we've talked about that for weeks and weeks about proof that God is there. But faith is saying, okay, I'm going to be obedient to God. I feel like He's calling me to do something. I'm going to follow that, even though I don't know what the consequences are going to be. And I think that's the hardest part of faith is I'm going to start tithing. And I can't imagine how I can make it financially. But I'm going to trust God anyway, and I'm going to give this much. You know, I think there's a lot of little steps of faith that, wow, I'm going to trust God with this much of my life. And then as we do that, it's like, good job, awesome. But now there's another big step that's coming. You need to continue to grow in your faith in the things that you're going to trust God. That's part of the maturing of Christ, of being a Christian. And then in your purity, set an example in your purity, the things that we expose ourselves to, whether that is toxic people who we are not being an influence on. It could be the media that we entertain, the music, the movies, the TV, the podcasts, whatever it is. It's the things that we expose ourselves to are those things that are an example of purity. So for me, how do I live out my faith in the situations I've been in, especially like going to new jobs and stuff? It's being ready, knowing that everyone, for me personally, everyone is not that thrilled with pastors all the time, not always having a great reputation, but going to jobs where I was ready for that. Knowing who I am, it was just a part of, I'm still a follower of God. I'm still a dad, a husband, a grandfather, no matter the situation I'm in. I don't change just because I'm in a different environment. And try to set an example in my work, doing the things that my boss told me to do, not talking about him behind his back when he was gone, having a life of integrity with the financial things I was entrusted with. That's what we're called to do in these situations. So.